At the federal level, from our viewpoint, juvenile justice is a state, it's a state-run program. We don't have, by and large, juvenile facilities. So when we get, and it happens every once in a blue moon, when we get a juvenile, usually someone won't give the right date of birth, or somebody doesn't do the math. I mean, I was in court this morning, I was trying to figure out, somebody does the math, and they miss the math, and they think the guy's 17, he's actually 18. And when you find out about it, you think alarms would go off. It's like, oh my God, we got a juvenile, what the heck do we do? Because we have a whole separate system for that, and it's designed that the juvenile goes to state court. And it's only when the state refuses to accept the individual that we can proceed. And in many of the same ways, it's, you have that kind of the same process in state court. It's called the waiver process. And typically, as you look at this chart, I love the part on the right is my favorite part. And as you can see, this is the area probably that we have to work on more, not with the chart making, but but as a society. So as for juveniles, the operative terms, and it's very similar to somewhat. I mean, it's similar to the military courts, because as you go to the juvenile system, there are things that it's against the law for juveniles to do that isn't against the law for us. I mean, I could walk away from home and leave, and that would not be against the law. I could choose, and you could choose not to go to school, and that would not be against the law. So for juveniles, there's a whole set of what they call status offenses, and like same in the military, there are things, you desert. I can desert home all I want. But if I'm in the military and I leave, you have the problem. It's the same, and it's the same for juveniles. So you have your status offenses. What are typically felonies in juvenile court are called acts of juvenile delinquency. And from our standpoint, as we work through both, the status offenses, you'll see criminal histories of individuals, and you'll see some status offenses in their criminal history, but it's the acts of juvenile delinquency. That is felony, or that would be felonies if they were adults. Those are kind of the indicators of later criminal behavior. But even juveniles, the juvenile court system have a procedure whereby they can waive the juvenile to adult court. And we do that fairly frequently in state court. And through the Reagan era, that was a pretty significant tough on crime era. But frankly, in the streets of the city I was living in, it was lit up by gunfire every night. And we averaged well over a homicide a day. And the population was shrinking, not because they were all getting shot. The people that could get up to leave were leaving. And many of the individuals were juveniles. And many of the drug operations would use juveniles because they were insulated from adult court, and so they would be adjudicated as juvenile delinquent, and then go into the juvenile court system, where depending on which state you are and which area you are, the goal is is more of a social services goal. That is to repair and restore and try to make you, give you the opportunity, both educational and support, to make yourself better, rehabilitate the juvenile. Whereas in the adult system, you have an element of that, but there's a lot of the punishment, the punitive aspect. And so as the streets, across the country were just lit up by gunfire, many of the individuals in juvenile, you would see a shift towards trying to get those juveniles, serious offenders, waived to adult court. And it was not uncommon. You usually have to go through a procedure to establish, in most of the cases, just that the crime was a very serious crime. And it wasn't that hard. And goodness knows, in Detroit we had quite a selection to choose from. So juveniles were getting waived and being sent to adult prison with the fair degree of frequency. So at your juvenile court level, you have the collision of all those individuals. I mean, an individual that's committed the most serious heinous crime with somebody that's run away from home, with somebody that, that isn't towing the line at home and is not going to school. And so when you're bringing all those people under one roof, it becomes very difficult to establish a program, given limited resources, to to rehabilitate those individuals. So most of the severe crimes, those individuals get pulled out and sent to adult court, and once they go to adult court, even then they start mixing with adult criminals, and then you start wondering, are we then creating the next generation? And so over the years, the states have kind of toggled back and forth between those approaches. Just get all the serious criminals out and into adult prison, and that's kind of assuming they're incorrigible and you're not going to be able to rehabilitate them. But at some point, they get out. And to give you the example, a couple of the guys I've seen in Stark Court is, they would say that I perfected my trade once I went to adult court. And so you'll see the states, and if this were a presentation just on juvenile court systems, it is highly complex just to figure out which state has kind of the age of majority. Whether it's 17. The state I was in, it was 17. So if you pull the trigger at 17 and 17 years in one day, you're an adult. There's no waiver. But if it's here, if you're 17 in one day, you're going to start in juvenile court. And then most of the jurisdictions will retain supervision over the individuals to 21 years of age. So if you pull the trigger at 17 and one day, they can hold you for up to your 21st birthday. Some of the states have gone as high as 24, and some of the commentators have said that maybe we need to expand that parameter to get more time to work with the individuals, expand it to 24. So those juvenile systems have the ability to work over a longer period of time with the juveniles. But so if going back as far as intake, you asked how we got a hold of that Swenson case. Most of the juvenile, the status offenses, truancy is going to come from the court, maybe your school resource, the school, maybe a school resource officer. Runaways, it's going to be the parents calling. The rest of it's going to be the police. The local police are going to be arresting Junior for shoplifting, or you get the we see very frequently the open containers, and then from there they'll go into the juvenile system. Step of the way, there's in essence, for lack of a better term, a diversion ability. Is how can you divert this individual to kind of a non-punitive environment, so that they don't have something on their record. And then if you can't do that, then they move to the next stage, and then they'll go to the prosecutor. And then the prosecutor has to determine, based on the individual, their track record, the type of offense, whether or not they're going to, whether or not they'll pursue some sort of status offense, or whether or not they'll pursue an act of juvenile delinquency. And then for the most serious offenders, the most serious recourse in juvenile court is to punt. That is the waiver. Send them over to the county court system, let he or she fend for themselves over there. But that being said, as we move forward as a society and move forward as criminal justice measures, it's more it's more of what we're doing with the individuals once they get out of the structured setting. To use the example earlier, the people you saw that I've seen that are institutionalized, it's almost like they work fine when everything is taken care of. But as they move out to having to find a job, and having to live with a family, having to have appropriate relations, somebody, you just can't, You just can't cold cop somebody for if you don't agree with what they're saying, but sometimes that's how things are settled in prison. So the kind of that furthest right side is how are we going to bring in, once the individual has been processed through the system, either diverted to a non-judicial outcome, or even if they're given some sort of sanction and they're detained for a period of time in the juvenile system. Once they come out, what is the aftercare? Who's going to be working with them so that they finish their education? Everyone, certainly folks in this room know that. I mean, you almost feel like it's tough enough with just an undergrad degree. I mean, can you imagine trying to go out and find a job without even a high school diploma? And then the additional strikes are you have a juvenile record. Should they be aware of that? You have a substance abuse problem. You don't have a stable, you don't have a stable home. Your dad's a drunk. Your mom's not at home. Your dad left years ago. Mom and dad, no one, you have a single parent, they're not employed. So it's the aftercare which appears to be the key. But for, as you guys start out on your careers, you'll quickly find kind of these structural difficulties with aftercare. We worked with, the U.S. Attorney and I went out to meet with recent parolees from the state pen. We went out to Canyon County and wanted to talk to them and let them know about these significant federal penalties that attach to drug crimes, firearms crimes, and because we are courts of limited jurisdiction, we have to focus our resources, and we told them, and we focus on you because you have a felony, you have a drug trafficking conviction. So people are going to be naturally looking at you. And as we talk with them, just for them to get to that meeting required transportation. Cars don't grow on trees, gas doesn't grow on trees. The bus system can be a bear. You may be going to your mental health. You go to your mental health appointment. That's on one side of town at 2 o'clock, and then you're supposed to be working at 3. And then you've got to go to substance abuse, which is at 6 o'clock in the evening on the other side of town, and then your GED class. So all these kind of structural impediments for adults as well as juveniles is really the kind of the wave of the future, is where we need to really focus our attention, our resources. Is how can we make it easy for someone to get complete aftercare, to get everything they need. And the Idaho Department of Corrections out in Canyon County, we're basically bought this old, I don't even know what it was. We walked up and, luckily the boss has good eyes and she said, yeah, it says Department of Corrections there. It must have been just some old office building. Had a conference room, and so they're just starting, drug aftercare is there, mental health was there, job was there, housing was there. And so all you had to do was get to that building, and then it was open when you needed it to be open, so that you could then start that, it's an uphill battle. And for juveniles, it's the same, because if this is a ship that we can right, this is where you can have it stop being a training ground and have it be more of a solution ground. Try to get that group. Everybody's not going to turn out to be a saint, but boy, if you could just steer a good percentage of them in the right direction, I'd much rather than having to pay taxes to house somebody, $26,000 a year to house somebody in a federal pen. I'd much rather see them make $26,000 so we can tax that, and then have them be productive members of society. And now we're focusing on the federal system is how, as people are coming back into society, how can we get it such that they can get the aftercare they need? I mean, I'm not here to tell you that it's going to be a rosy picture, because drug addiction and criminal behavior and criminological thinking are difficult things to correct. But the structural impediments that are in play, to the extent we can remove those, then at least you remove that excuse. So try to move towards one-stop shopping for aftercare. And then in the juvenile court system, pretty much the only difference between the, an adult court system, other than the ones I talked about, is, they over the years have, been able to get constitutional rights afforded to counsel, call and confront witnesses. The only thing that they really still don't have is our jury trials. So the rest of it mirrors very much an adult system. And the victims' rights are very similar as well. They can be a little bit more challenging, but I think from the prosecutor's standpoint, the rights that are afforded the witnesses are the same. But because of, oftentimes you're not allowed to release certain names publicly, it can be a little bit of a challenge, but your rights are going to be the same.